Your request, Mr. Grobman, for an account of my experiences as a chaplain in European theater of operations, with special reference to my encounters and my contacts and my dealings with survivors of the Holocaust, those who had hidden during the danger period, and those who had come into France and Belgium after the end of the opening of the concentration camps. Period paragraph. I shall do this in a very informal, a casual manner, and shall depend for a great deal of my information on a series of letters, almost daily letters, which I wrote to Mrs. Miller during the time I was overseas. However, these letters are rather brief, usually only 1 page in length, and instead of my giving her a detailed account of each day's activities, I attempted merely to mention them in the most sketchy manner in order to have her understand that I was doing a few things while in Europe. Period paragraph. I was not shipped to Europe until March of 1945 and was sent upon arrival on the continent to a Repo-Depot replacement depot in Dolheim, Belgium. After remaining there a few weeks, I was assigned to the 15th General Hospital in Liège, Belgium. Very shortly after my assuming my duties in the 15th General Hospital, perhaps within a day or two, I made contact with the local Jewish community, and the first man I met was a Rabbi Cantor. But there is a hyphen, Rabbi Cantor, whose last name I recall, Lipkifker, Lipchivcher, period. For the life of me at this moment, I cannot remember his first name, and I do not recall any portion of the letters which gives his name, period. However, I did visit Liège in 1957, but unfortunately, Rabbi Lipkifker was out of town on vacation at that time. Whether he still lives there, whether he is still living, I do not know, as no further communication was attempted, period. I also found on Liège several Jewish officers who were very much interested in the Jewish community, officers whose service there antedated my own and who already had made friends with Lipkifker and with other members of the Jewish community. One of the interesting things during the 2 months of my presence in Liège was a Sunday night soiree or a Sunday night chavurah, on which occasions several doctors and a few enlisted men would gather, would bring refreshments, would schmoose and would nosh. The names of the 2 officers whom I remember and who were closest to me in whatever I attempted to do in the community are Meyer Bloom, Dr. Meyer Bloom of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Dr. Mitch Oestreich, Oestreich, of Buffalo, New York. If comments from them are of any value to you, I'm sure that you can find their locations in Johnstown and in Buffalo. To the best of my knowledge, at least the best of my knowledge, these two men survived. Period, paragraph. With Lip Kipker, I would usually conduct services in a synagogue because there were not too many Jewish men at the hospital interested in services, and being at the civilian synagogue enabled the people of the communities to attend if they so desired, and really to be assured of a minyan, especially on Saturday morning. Very often I would speak, and Lipkivker would conduct the service, or would at least chant portions of the services. They had a very lovely voice. During the early period of my service on the Edge, I wrote to my wife suggesting that the sisterhood in Elyria, Ohio, where she was living at that time with her parents, and also, of course, with our children, might like to help the Liège community. I requested packages of men's, women's, and boys' clothing, and also suggested that if the sisterhood would like to make a chuppah cloth for the congregation, it would indeed be very helpful. I cannot recall with exactitude if the sisterhood ever bought or ever made or ever sent the chuppah cloth, but I'm rather sure that the Ohio group acceded to my request. Of course, I do know that a number of packages were sent, which I distributed through the local relief committee. This was a committee which was formed of local Jews, but it is possible, and I'm not quite sure, that there might have been a JDC man there, if not permanently located, one who came in from time to time. The soldiers of the 15th General Hospital, as well as the Jewish soldiers in the various installations in which I served, were always most generous and gracious in their desire to help the Jewish people in the various communities. Period. The way they helped usually was by giving some money when requested. And of course, these were not very large sums of money, but the more usual method was to donate a portion of their PX rations, candy, soap, other materials, to be used by the local relief committees and to be given to the survived families or individuals who survived the Holocaust. So I won't repeat this again because the same thing happened in the various places where I served. The soldiers did help. And you also note that communities in the states to which I wrote, Ohio, the Elyria, Ohio, and Sandusky, Ohio, Helen, Arkansas, also were very helpful in this matter. Among the individuals who helped most generously while I was on the Edge was a Mr. Leif Solomon of Helen, Arkansas, who at my request sent a check in the sum of $100 to help me with my relief, quote-unquote, efforts in Liège. Other people did send me smaller checks checks from time to time, but I don't have any record of the names or the amounts. Another thing which hampers my recollection of the service in the ETO is that I sent most of my papers to the American Jewish Archives at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati at the request of Dr. Jacob Marcus. And there might be some helpful material among those papers, but it's too much difficult to secure them. I shall describe some very interesting events or experiences which belong to my Liège days. Among the men with whom I came rather well acquainted in Liège was a Mr. Fremder, F-R-E-M-D-E-R. Mr. Fremder had hidden with his wife, or shall I more aptly say, been hidden with his wife by a farm couple outside of Liège. They had been furnished all the necessary forged papers and had managed to evade the Nazis or the SS and to survive the war. At times I wondered how he managed to do this, if he ever had a personal encounter with the SS, because Mr. Fremder spoke with a very decided East European accent, a Yiddish accent, in no way associated with Belgium. But he survived, he did. Instantly, I might say that a great number of the members of the Jewish community of Liège, whom I did meet during my time there, were Eastern Jews, and very few, if any, were of long residence in Belgium or of a second or third generation in that country. This happened because a number of Jews were taken prisoners by the Germans and held in Belgium. And after the Germans were driven out of Belgium in World War One, they remained, World War One, they remained in Belgium, took up residence in Belgium and many in Liège. But going back to Mr. Fremder, his wife died during the war and was buried somewhere near Liège as a Catholic. When it became possible to do so, her body was exhumed and reburied in the Liège cemetery. Liège did not have a Jewish cemetery, but used the community cemetery and did not even have a special place or area within that cemetery. But Jewish bodies were buried here, there, and yon. Miss Fremder then was buried at a site separate from any other Jewish grave, and a service was held for her. It was my sad privilege to participate. Mr. Fremder asked me if I would, and Mr. Lipkifker asked me if I would, and I did say a few words in broken Yiddish and in perhaps a little less broken French. Mr. Fremder also had a son. This son had disappeared during the Nazi occupation of Liège. He had disappeared because he joined the White Army, the Armée Blanche. His father did not know his whereabouts, but was rather certain that he had been killed. The practice of the SS was to bury their victims outside the walls of the Citadel, the Belgian army post in which the 15th General Hospital was located. I would encounter him on occasion as I left the post on foot to go to town or to go somewhere, some other place. Fremder was trying to find out if his body had been exhumed, which had been identified as a son. One day, as I walked out of the Citadel, I noticed Mr. Fremder near one of the tents where the Red Cross doctors did their examinations. And I could see by his face, by his mood, by the posture of his body, and by the tears that at long last they had found his son. And so within a few days we went back to the cemetery, and there we buried the son in the same grave as his mother, the son atop the mother. This double occupancy of graves is not uncommon in Belgium. And there again, I had the sad privilege of participating in a funeral, again in Yiddish and in French. One Friday night at the synagogue, or perhaps it was a Sabbath morning, we had the pleasure of the presence of a Palestinian Jew, a member of the Royal Engineers. This man had been captured by the Germans, had been released in that area, and had come to to one of the hospitals. I think it was the 298th hospital for medical attention. Just as a matter of interest, possible interest, around the edge there are there's several, I should say 3 or 4 general hospitals, and it was my duty to service each one of them, as I was the only Jewish chaplain in the Liège area. One Friday or Saturday morning, as I have said, I invited the Palestinian Jew to speak to the congregation, composed of both soldiers and civilians, and he described to them life in Palestine, at least in the pre-war days. By the time the month of June had arrived, and time had advanced towards July 1945, a few survivors of concentration camps and survivors from other places, survivors who had been hidden in other places, came into Liège. Some of them were children of the community. I relate 2 instances of Rabbi Lipkifker's meeting with youngsters who had returned home. One was a young girl in her late teens, and she had been saved by a Polish Gentile in the concentration camps. I don't know the exact details, I never did know them. But apparently one of the conditions of the young man saving the girl was that when they left the concentration camp, she married him. It was a rather pathetic scene, as was another scene which I shall describe in the synagogue, when Lipkifker met with the girl and with the young man and asked me to be present, to be whatever help I might, to be supportive of him. The young lady did not want to marry the Pole, and the Pole was heartbroken, urging, pleading, cajoling, insisting that the promise be kept. But Lipkifker, and I think I had to agree with him, insisted that the girl was under no great obligation because the promise had been made under stress in a way to save life, pikuach nefesh, and therefore she was not obligated to marry him, and she did not want to do so. So the man finally left. At another time, he talked to several young girls who had been saved by the Catholics, been placed in Catholic schools, and who had become thoroughly indoctrinated with Catholicism and did not want to return to Judaism. In fact, they did not want to return to their families. Of course, I was present only at one meeting with these young girls. It was a matter for a long time treatment or counseling or handling, call it what you will. And I cannot say what the final outcome in this matter was. In Liège and at my other stations, I had visitors from time to time from among the civilian population who came to me with their personal problems, sometimes a problem which had some contact with the American Army, other times had no contact with the Army, but they were in search of help which they thought that the Army might be able to render. As I read these letters to my wife, I note that I mentioned a Jewish couple who came to my office one day for the simple matter of asking for mezuzot for themselves and for others. I gave them mezuzot because we always had a large supply of the furnished by the Jewish Welfare Board. And at this time, I might as well go on and say that when I was in Paris and also in other cities, I would be stopped on the streets frequently and by people who noticed my chaplain's insignia and knew what it signified. People who would request a mezuzah or two or three, one for each member of the family. Many of these by that time, those who had returned from the concentration camps, and also many who had hidden away and who had no numbers on their arms. It might even be well to state here that one of my experiences, or an experience often repeated, was to be stopped on the streets of Paris, the streets of Nice, and to be shown the marking of the concentration camp, to be shown pictures of those dear ones the individual had lost in the camps, and to be told that I couldn't understand, I couldn't appreciate, I couldn't feel what they had suffered, and I had to agree. Nobody who had not gone through the experience personally could ever understand it or realize it. But people also came to me with medical problems, asking me if they could get them into the American hospital, Army hospital, or at least if they could have one of the doctors examine them. Since I served most of the time in general hospitals, I did have some contacts, and from time to time was able to enlist the aid of a medical friend unofficially. Could not, of course, be done, usually officially. There had to be some unusual circumstance for this to happen. The commanding officer of the 15th General Hospital during my 2 months or so of service with the installation was a Colonel John Bachman, Bachman, period. I'm not certain if his first name was John, but if there's any need for more specific information, then of course the Army records will reveal it. Colonel Bachman was very knowledgeable about our contacts with the Jewish community of Liège, especially knowledgeable about my contact, about my efforts to help the community in any way I possibly could, and was always very pleasant, very agreeable, and very favorable towards such work on my part. I express the hope that during this taping, even if I do not follow a strict chronological or structure or topical structure, that it will not be too difficult for you to glean from it whatever material you may want. Otherwise, perhaps at some future date or when I receive the transcript, I can place it in proper sequence and a better logical order. However, I'm going back now to some of the activities at the 15th General Hospital. And I quote from one of the letters I wrote my wife sometime in May. Quote, "I do not remember if I asked you in a former letter to make a request of Dad," that is my father-in-law, "and the Illyria community. However, if so, it will not hurt to repeat. I wonder if the men are willing to do something direct. Specifically, I want them to collect a fund, a few dollars from each family, and to send me a money order. I know that they give to the local federation, but it will not hurt anyone to give a few extra dollars. I want the money to aid the congregation to rebuild the synagogue and to maintain itself. I have asked others like Leif and Saul Kraft to do the same thing. I am going to write Lester in Toledo. Tell them to do it at once and to send me money orders." Again, may I repeat that I am not certain if my requests were granted or the amount of money which was sent me, except by my friend Leif Solomon of Helena, Arkansas. The Lester to whom I allude was Lester Alexander of Toledo, Ohio, at one time very active in the Jewish Welfare Board, and Saul Kraft was a chaplain who served with me in Miami Beach, Florida. One excerpt from a letter dated 3rd of June 1945 to Mrs. Miller, and it refers back to the burial of Mrs. Fremder. "This morning I attended and participated to a slight extent in another civilian funeral. The deceased died several years ago during the German occupation. A woman of 45, she passed away while hiding with her husband and sons somewhere in a small village. It was necessary to bury her either without benefit of clergy or as a Catholic to fool the Germans. Her body was disinterred and brought into Liège in a sealed coffin and then buried again in the local cemetery, not in the Jewish cemetery, for there is none. Jews here are interred in community ground, and Christian and Jew lie next to each other." I quote again from a letter, or the same letter dated June 3rd, and it refers again to an incident which I have described earlier on this tape. "Another interesting incident took place at the synagogue this morning. When the rabbi and I entered for the service, he was told that a young couple wanted to see him. There, seated on the back bench, a young man and a young girl, he Catholic, she a Polish Jewess. They had been in the same concentration camp. and the young man saved her life and brought her home to Liège upon her promise to marry him. He apparently ardently desires to marry her, but she does not now want to keep her word. She gave her promise in return for his help. The rabbi told him that he would not marry them and that the girl did not have to marry him, that she promised to save herself. And of course, most of us would make promises to save our lives. However, he did say that if the girl decides she wants to marry him, then there is nothing he can do to stop it. The man wept bitterly, but consented to leave the young woman in the home of a member of the congregation. And so it goes. Week by week, I see more of the tragedies and the problems of European Jewry and cannot say that I see an immediate solution. Their lives have been broken and tangled, their families separated temporarily and permanently. It's a human jigsaw puzzle. There's not much I can do, but I try to help in little ways and try to extend every courtesy to the community. Yes. From a letter dated July 1st, 1945. Today I visited a displaced persons camp in Liège. I accompanied the rabbi and two laymen on a matter concerning the Jews held there. The Jewish displaced persons want to go to Brussels, and the Chaverim want to request permission for them to do so. Later in the day, the rabbi and I saw the UNRWA, UNRRA man in this area, a Jew from New York who originated in Czechoslovakia. This man stated that Brussels could not take care of these people. They should be left where they are for the present. Close quote from letter. I do not recall if I accompanied the rabbi and the two laymen to an army office, but it seems very possible that I did so. To continue at greater length concerning, in reply to your question, is whether I interceded with the Army for DPs. It is very possible that matters did come up from time to time, which required some discussion with Army officials, period. Unfortunately, however, I did not describe these meetings or these consultations in my letters to my wife, and I can only surmise that in Liège and also in the other stations where I served, I had experiences of this kind. But I continue from the letter. The camp is located in an old school in the buildings, and the usual odor of disinfectant prevails. But above this odor could be discerned the smell of unwashed bodies and clothing. Families were crowded into small rooms. The men, women, and children slept together. Bunks in double tiers had been placed in these rooms. Poles, Russians, Hollanders, Romanians, the conglomerate of the slave labor of Nazi Germany. People who wanted to go home, who did not want to go home, who had no homes to which to go. Among the latter category, the Jews, always the homeless Jews. Close letter, quotation. It might be noticed from this paragraph that this was not a Jewish DP camp, but a camp in which were found many nationalities. I continued to read from the letter. We were there at lunchtime. The usual line, crude utensils and plates, bread and beans for lunch, not in too large a quantity, more than they had in Germany, but still not enough to fill them and fatten them. But then it's quite a job to feed hundreds of thousands of these displaced persons. Our army is furnishing the food, and the Belgian government the supervision and the labor. One must see a camp of this type to glimpse the great problem of the displaced people of Europe. At this point, I am going to rely on memory alone, but I do recall that in Liège or another city, and I'm almost certain that it was Liège, I at one evening attended a meeting of about 30 young people, high school age or thereabouts, and the main topic of the evening was Palestine. There was expressed, as I recall, a strong desire on the part of the young people to go to Palestine and to make their lives there. I might add here that in one of my stations, and this too might have been Liège, although I believe it was either in Nice or in Paris, I encountered a Polish Jew who had been in the concentration camps and who had survived, period. This man, contrary to the young people in Liège, at the meeting which I described a moment or so ago, was interested in Palestine but not in going there to live. He was one of the several communists whom I encountered who expressed a desire to return to their homeland, as they called it, to Poland or to another of the now Soviet dominated countries, there to solve the Jewish problem, as they expressed it, through Marxism, through communism, period. In the many years since 1945 and 1946, I have wondered what became of these people, and I'm afraid that subsequent events in Poland were not at all to their expectations, and that many of them might have ended tragically. And now I leave Liège, for I was transferred to the 228 General Hospital, which at one time had orders to proceed to the Far East, but whose orders were changed to relieve the 3rd General Hospital in Aix-en-Provence, period. The 3rd General Hospital had among its personnel many doctors on the staff of the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. In fact, it was a Mount Sinai hospital when it came over to Europe. But some changes, of course, had been made in the personnel during the time that this unit served at Aix-en-Provence, period. Aix had a very small Jewish population, and as I described in a letter to my wife, most of the people who lived there were refugees who, in one way or another, had reached that very charming town. During my stay in Aix-en-Provence, which lasted about 3 months, I made contact with the Jewish community, whatever there was of it, in that city, and had frequent communication with the people. Again, I helped the civilians in any manner I could, and one of the small ways in which the Jewish personnel, with myself as their director, so to speak, did help, was to gather candy from time to time to make the children a little happier after their many sorrows and sufferings. I quote from a letter. I am at the office. A couple of soldiers and I fixed about 40 bags of candy for the Jewish children of X. I shall be in Nice Saturday night, but the men will be at the synagogue for the Simchat Torah service and will give the kids the candy. We did not have too much, but each child will get about 10 cents worth. For them, it is a lot. Close quote from letter. I might explain that although stationed in Aix-en-Provence and assigned to the 228th General Hospital with Colonel Woodruff commanding, I was also given the duty of visiting Nice, and within a few weeks I was spending a great deal of time in Nice and holding services there more frequently than in X, period. This was due to the fact that X had very few Jewish civilians, and very few Jews were attached to the 228th General Hospital at this time. Therefore, in the next minutes of the description of my activities, I shall be describing Nice as well as X. Also, may I say at this time that 228th General Hospital was in a western-based section, and the chaplain there was Abraham Hazelcorn, who became a very good friend of mine, and I'm sure that you have his name on your list, period. It should be easy to contact him, for he's now living in one of the suburbs of Tel Aviv, and I'm sure that he can give you a much longer and a much more detailed and a much more significant account of his work than I can of my own. From time to time, I would go to the headquarters of the Delta Base section to see Hazel Corn. And in one of my letters, I state, quote, they have a lot of odds and ends in the way of food and candy there. These are small packages, broken boxes of rations and other sources, and are available to the chaplains for relief work. So I got a box for my clients in Nice. Of interest might be another paragraph in the same letter. I also spent part of the morning trying to secure information about temporary duty in Germany for one of the soldiers. He came from that sad land as a refugee and wants to go to the Koblenz area to search for members of his family. Our colonel gave me permission to try to arrange the deal, but there's a lot of red tape and he may not be able to get there. Close quote from letter. Our colonel was really very helpful and very sympathetic and permitted me a great deal of leeway in working with the civilians and also in collecting things from the commissary, which were in surplus, and from our soldiers in order to help our Jewish civilians, refugees, or those who had survived the war in X itself. While in X, I received many packages from home and shared these with the civilians. The organizations like the Sisterhood in Elyria, Ohio, or Helen, Arkansas, and some men and women from Sandusky, Ohio, helped me at this time as they had done before. Among the things I requested was materials, which could be sewn into garments by the women of the area. From a letter written from Nice. This quote, "This afternoon I took a blind Jewish woman to the 165th General Hospital to see the eye specialist. She wants to go to America for an operation, and I wanted his opinion. The right eye is gone, retinal lesions, and there is a cataract over the left, and the condition back of that cataract cannot be discerned. She claims there is no surgeon in France. She trusts in no medicaments. Sad case, but I'm afraid that she will have to try the local surgeons." Who, close quote from letter. George Hanukkah of 1945. I began collecting candy both in Aix and in Nice amongst the soldiers for distribution to the children at Hanukkah time. Again, I was able to gather together a considerable number of chocolate bars, and thus brought a measure of happiness to the children. I quote a rather lengthy passage from a letter written on November 6, 1945.